the promise buried in silence. Rain hammered the cracked windows of Ellie's old diner as thunder rolled over the lonely highway. The neon sign outside flickered like a dying heartbeat, casting a dim, pink glow over the empty booths. Once a lively stop for travelers and truckers, it now stood nearly forgotten, much like the woman who kept it running with trembling hands and a broken heart. Ellie sat behind the counter, her wedding ring still on, tracing her finger along the worn edge of an old photo, her husband in uniform, smiling young, proud. He had built this diner before shipping out. He never came back. In his absence, the place became her temple. But lately, even that was being ripped from her. Locals whispered behind her back. Developers wanted the land. Thugs had come in twice, demanding she sell. Last week, someone left a dead bird nailed to her back door. She told no one. That night, just before closing, the bell above the door chimed. A man stepped in, broad-shouldered, weathered, with military posture no civilian could fake. Beside him, a large German shepherd with calm, calculating eyes padded forward. The dog paused at the door, sniffed the air, and stared straight at the old photograph on the wall, the one of Ellie's husband. The stranger's eyes followed his dog's gaze. Then, softly, he said, "He told me I'd find you here." Ellie froze. Her breath caught. She had never seen this man before. But something in his voice, and something in the way the dog looked at her, told her husband's story wasn't finished. Not yet, and the promise he once made wasn't buried with him. Ellie's hands trembled as she gripped the counter. The air inside the diner seemed to shift, heavier now, filled with something unspoken. The man who stood before her looked like he had carried the weight of war and memories too painful to share. His companion, the German shepherd, sat obediently by his side, tail still, eyes alert, as if he understood the gravity of the moment. Ellie swallowed hard. "You knew Tom?" The man nodded once. "Sergeant Thomas Rayner. We served together. Afghanistan, 2010. Ellie's knees nearly gave way, and she steadied herself on the counter. She hadn't heard her husband's full name spoken aloud in years, not with that kind of reverence. Most people just called him Tom, forgetting the rank, the sacrifices, the man behind the uniform. But this stranger hadn't. The dog, sensing Ellie's rising emotion, stood up and walked slowly toward her. She watched as he gently placed his paw on the counter, right next to the photo of Tom. Her heart ached. "I'm sorry," she whispered, mostly to herself. "I didn't know anyone else was still." "Alive?" the man said gently. "Most aren't, but I made it back, and I brought him with me, in a way." He sat down at the counter without waiting for an invitation, and the dog curled his feet like it had always belonged there. Ellie noticed a patch sewn onto the man's worn jacket, an old military insignia, faded with time, and beneath it, stitched in thick thread, a single name, Atlas. "That his name?" she asked, nodding toward the dog. The man looked down, smiling softly. "Yeah, he was trained as a bomb sniffer. Saved all our lives more times than I can count. But when the war ended, there wasn't much left for either of us." Ellie looked into the dog's intelligent eyes. There was wisdom there and sadness. "What's your name?" she finally asked. "Call me Jack," he said. She nodded, slowly processing the moment. "And why are you here, Jack?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but carefully kept. He unfolded it and slid it across the counter. Ellie hesitated, then picked it up. Her eyes scanned the words. It was her husband's handwriting. "If something happens to me, and you make it home, find her. Tell her about the promise. She deserves to know." The bottom was signed, Tom. Tears welled in her eyes. The world around her blurred. Jack's voice was steady, but his eyes were glassy. "He saved me more times than I deserved. That promise he made, it wasn't just to you. It was to the truth. He wanted you to know what happened, not the official version, the real one." Ellie sat down across from him, overwhelmed. For years, all she had was silence. A box of medals, a folded flag, and the official report. Killed in action during a failed extraction mission. No details. No closure. Until now. Jack looked around the diner. This place, he talked about it all the time. Said it was more than a diner. It was his dream. Your dream. Said you made the best apple pie in the Midwest. Ellie gave a small, choke laugh. He always was a liar. Jack smiled, but it faded quickly. You need to know what really happened. About that last mission. Ellie's hands clenched in her lap. I'm listening. The night outside darkened, and rain tapped against the windows like a quiet drumbeat. Jack leaned forward, his voice low, as if the story itself still haunted him. There were 7 of us in that unit. Recon mission. We weren't supposed to engage. Just gather intel and get out. He paused. We walked right into an ambush. Someone gave up our location. Maybe a local. Maybe someone higher up. Doesn't matter now. What matters is we were pinned down. Bad. Atlas whimpered softly, as if remembering. Tom took lead. He was always the one to volunteer first. Always believed in protecting the rookies. He dragged 2 of our guys out of line of fire with bullets, snapping past his ears. We tried to hold our position and call for evac. Jack's eyes grew distant. The chopper came late. Too late. By then, 2 of our men were gone. One was bleeding out. Tom. He paused, voice cracking. Tom carried that man half a mile through open fire. Told me to cover him. Atlas helped too. Found safe paths, sniffed out traps. We got to the evac point, but only 3 of us made it onto that bird. Ellie's eyes were full now. She clutched the paper in her hand. He stayed behind? She asked, already knowing the answer. Jack nodded. He gave me his tags. Told me to give you the letter. Said if he didn't make it, someone had to carry the truth. Not medals, not flags, but the truth. Ellie looked at the dog. And Atlas, he wouldn't leave. Stayed by the chopper door, howling, like he knew Tom wasn't coming back. It took days to get him to eat again. She reached down and stroked the dog's head. And now you're here. Jack's jaw tightened. And now someone's threatening to destroy the one place Tom loved most. Ellie stiffened. You know, she asked. Jack nodded. The men trying to buy your land? They're not just local punks. They're part of a company looking to build a warehouse right on this block. And they don't care who they hurt to get it. Ellie's heart pounded. I don't have the strength to fight them. Jack looked her in the eye. Yes, you do. And you're not alone. That night, Ellie locked the diner's door and handed Jack the keys to the guest room upstairs, the same one where her husband used to nap between shifts. Jack accepted without protest, as if he belonged there. Atlas curled at the foot of the stairs, guarding the hallway like a soldier still on duty. Ellie stared out the window for a long time, the letter from Tom clutched to her chest. She hadn't dreamed in years. That night, she did. Tom, in uniform, standing at the diner's door, smiling, nodding, and behind him, the silhouette of a dog. The next morning, Ellie brewed fresh coffee and watched as Jack fixed the diner's old porch step without being asked. When the first customer of the day, a trucker, walked in, he did a double take at the sight of the military man behind the counter and the massive dog beside him. You new here? The trucker asked. Jack smiled, just passing through, helping out a friend. From that day on, the diner began to fill again. Word spread. Locals who had once stayed away came back, some out of curiosity, others because they remembered Tom and respected his legacy. But not everyone was pleased. That afternoon, 2 men in suits walked in, sunglasses on, arrogance heavy in their steps. They didn't order food. They handed Ellie a final notice. Last chance, sweetheart, one of them said. Sign over the deed, or the next time, we won't be so polite. Atlas stood up, growled. Low, deep, final. The men laughed nervously, but their eyes flickered with fear. Jack stepped forward. She's not alone anymore. The suits left. Ellie looked at Jack. They'll come back. I hope they do, Jack said. Some promises were made on this soil, and I intend to keep them. The days that followed were a strange mix of unease and healing. The diner, which had been weighed down by silence and loss, began to breathe again. Ellie caught herself smiling more often, moving with a renewed sense of purpose. Jack worked around the place like he belonged there. He fixed broken stools, patched the roof that had leaked for months, and painted the walls with the same steady hands that had once loaded rifles and bandaged wounded soldiers. Atlas, ever watchful, remained close by, his eyes alert to every shift in the air. Children waved at him from across the street now, and the regulars started sneaking in bits of bacon in exchange for a tail wag or a rare nuzzle. But the calm didn't last. Late one evening, Jack returned from a trip into town. His eyes were sharp, his jaw locked, and his knuckles bruised. He tossed the keys on the counter without a word. "They slashed my tires," he said after a long pause. Ellie's stomach sank. "Are you hurt?" Jack shrugged. "Nothing I haven't handled before. They followed me from the gas station. Tried to box me in near the old train yard. One of them had a bat. I made sure he won't be lifting it again any time soon." Atlas growled low, pacing by the window as if he sensed the danger still lingered nearby. Ellie walked over and peered outside. The diner's neon sign buzzed quietly, casting a pale pink glow into the darkened street. But there, beyond the reach of the light, shadows moved. They were watching, waiting, and clearly not finished. "They said I had until the end of the month," Ellie whispered. "And they're not just talking anymore." Jack poured himself a cup of coffee. "Then we make them stop talking." She stared at him, confused. "How?" He turned to Atlas. The dog met his gaze, still alert, still ready. Jack's voice was calm, but there was a hard edge to it. "We remind them what loyalty looks like." Later that night, as Atlas lay curled at Jack's feet, Ellie returned from the storage room, carrying a dusty old box. She hadn't opened it in years. Its clasps were rusted, the corners worn down, but she knew what it held. It was the last box the Army ever sent her, Tom's belongings. Jack knelt beside her as she placed it on the floor and slowly lifted the lid. Inside were fragile pieces of life interrupted. Letters folded neatly, a few medals in velvet pouches, a faded photograph of Tom in uniform, and one worn leather-bound notebook. She picked up a journal and handed it to Jack. He always kept this with him. "Maybe it'll help you remember him." Jack opened the journal and ran a finger across the page. The ink faded, but still legible. He closed his eyes. "He wrote this the night before our last mission. I remember. He was scared, not for himself, for you. He didn't want to leave anything unsaid." Jack took a shaky breath and began to read aloud. "If I don't make it back, it's not because I wasn't strong enough. It's because someone had to stand so others could live. If I fall, let them know I chose it. I chose to protect. I chose to keep a promise." Ellie's eyes filled with tears. "I always wondered if he had regrets." "He didn't," Jack said. "Only one. That he wouldn't see you grow old in this place. He talked about the diner all the time. The way your hair caught the sunlight through the window. The smell of cinnamon rolls baking in the morning. He wanted this life. He died fighting to protect it." Ellie squeezed the edge of the journal tightly. "Why did you really come here, Jack? Beyond the promise." Jack hesitated. His voice softened. "I lost everything after the war. My parents didn't understand. I couldn't keep a job. I drank too much, slept in my car some nights, couch surfed on others. The world moved on, but I couldn't. I kept waking up in Afghanistan." He looked down at Atlas, who had lifted his head and rested it gently on Jack's knee. "But he never left me. Atlas stayed when everyone else walked away. When I hit rock bottom, he was there. He laid on my chest when I couldn't breathe, nudged my hand when I thought about giving up. He's the reason I'm still standing." Ellie gently touched his hand. "And now you're saving me." Jack's eyes met hers. Maybe that was a promise all along. The next morning, they found the back window shattered. The wall was spray-painted in bold red letters. "Get out." Ellie called the police, but they were indifferent. No witnesses, no video footage, no help. Jack didn't wait. He installed cameras himself, changed the locks, reinforced the back door. He began noting every car that drove past the diner. He didn't say much, but Ellie knew. He was preparing for a war that no one else would fight. Then came the worst night. While Ellie was cleaning the kitchen and Jack was locking up, a loud bang rattled the windows. Jack ran outside and Atlas bolted into the alley. What they found stopped their hearts. Someone had tampered with the gas line. Below the porch was a crudely built incendiary device, a homemade bomb. Had Atlas not caught the scent in time, the diner would have gone up in flames. Jack handed it over to the police. Their response was hollow. "We'll look into it." Ellie was shaking by the time she sat down at the counter. "Maybe it's time. Maybe I sell." Jack stared out the window. "And let them win? Let everything Tom died for go up in smoke." "I don't know what else to do," she said. "We fight back," Jack replied. "Not with fists. With the truth. With the one thing they can't silence, his story." That night, they created a video. Jack sat on the diner's porch, the American flag behind him, Atlas at his side. He spoke into the camera, his voice low but unwavering. He told the story of the ambush, of how Tom saved 6 men, of the sacrifice and the promise. Ellie joined him in the video, holding Tom's journal. She read from it. She showed the letters, the medals, the photographs. "This diner is more than a place to eat," she said. "It's a place where my husband's memory lives, where his last promise is honored every single day." At the end of the video, Atlas lifted his paw and rested it on a photograph of Tom. They posted the video, not expecting much. By midnight, it had over 20,000 views. By morning, it passed 200,000. Veterans began commenting. Families across the country shared it. Truckers rerouted their drives to stop in. Former soldiers who had served with Tom wrote their own stories. The story was everywhere. And then came the reporters. News vans parked outside the diner. Journalists interviewed Ellie and Jack. Atlas became a media sensation. People cried when they heard Tom's story. They cheered when they saw the diner still standing. And that's when the developers came back. This time, their tone had changed. They smiled too much, offered bigger buyouts, played the sympathy card. "You've had your moment," one of them said. "Let's talk again. It's not personal, just business." Jack stood, eyes hard. "You can't buy what was earned in blood." They left empty-handed. Days later, Ellie received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside were printed documents, emails, permits, land contracts. A whistleblower from inside the development company had exposed everything. The permits were forged. The land acquisition was illegal. The entire plan to bulldoze the neighborhood was a bluff. Ellie handed the documents to the news station. Within hours, a state investigation was launched. The developers vanished. Charges were filed. And the diner stood tall, stronger than ever. Over time, the walls of the diner became more than decor. They became a memorial. Framed photos of soldiers lined the booths. Veterans left their patches and insignias. Letters were pinned to a corkboard in the entryway. The diner became a sanctuary. Ellie added a new wing, a small community room. They named it the Soldier's Promise. It hosted support groups, community dinners, job fairs for veterans. Jack never left. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he had finally found a place where pain had meaning, where sacrifice was honored, where promises were kept. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Ellie watched through the window as Jack tossed a stick for Atlas in the gravel lot. The dog sprinted after it, tail wagging like he hadn't seen war, like he'd never known loss. Just a dog, at peace, chasing joy. She stepped outside. "You two look good here," she said softly. Jack smiled. "We finally found home." Atlas barked once and ran into the twilight, chasing the wind with the heart of a soldier who had found peace. The summer air turned softer in the weeks that followed, as if the town itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The threats were gone. The shadows had receded. And for the first time in years, Ellie allowed herself to feel something that had become foreign. Peace. Mornings in the diner were no longer quiet with tension, but alive with warmth. The aroma of brewed coffee and sizzling eggs filled the air, mingling with a hum of laughter and conversation. Locals came not just for food, but to be part of something greater. New faces from out of town appeared each day, strangers drawn in by a story that had found them through a screen and refused to let go. Ellie found herself leaning into the joy of small things. A girl shyly asking to pet Atlas. A veteran tearing up as he ran his hand along the wall of remembrance. A letter left at the register by someone who had lost their father in the same war. She read every one. One afternoon, as the sun poured golden light through the front windows, a man in a wheelchair rolled in. He wore a worn army jacket and had a scar across his left cheek that spoke of battles fought far from home. He didn't speak right away. He simply looked around the room, at the faces, at the photos, at the flag hanging proudly above the counter. Then he looked at Ellie. "You don't know me," he said, "but I knew Tom. He saved my life in Helmand." Ellie's heart skipped. He pulled something from his jacket pocket, a folded photograph of Tom grinning, arms slung around the shoulder of a younger man. The resemblance was clear. "I was there when it happened." The man said, "That ambush." He ran into it to drag me out. He should have made it. We were this close to the chopper. Ellie took the photo, hands trembling. She had stared at Tom's face so many times, but here he was again in a new story from another life, alive in memory. The man continued, his voice low, his eyes damp. "I never got to thank him. I didn't even know how. But when I saw your video, I knew I had to come. This place, this diner, it's the thank you. It's everything." Ellie reached across the counter and held his hand, the silence between them more powerful than any words. Later that night, she and Jack sat on the porch steps. Atlas lay beside them, snoring softly, his head on Jack's boot. "You think he knows?" Ellie asked, looking out at the stars. "That we kept the promise?" Jack tilted his head, watching the sky. "I think he always knew we would. That's why he made me swear." She nodded slowly. "Sometimes I feel like he's still here, like the air carries him. When the wind chimes sing or the light hits the kitchen just right, it's like he's watching." Jack didn't laugh. He didn't try to reason it away. He simply said, "I believe it." A few minutes passed in gentle silence before Ellie turned to him. "Why haven't you left?" Jack looked surprised. "Why would I?" "I mean, you've done your part," she said. "You kept your promise. You helped me fight. You could start over now. Go wherever you want." He smiled softly, then looked down at Atlas, who wagged his tail in his sleep. "I don't need to start over. I already did." Ellie didn't reply. She just leaned against him, shoulder to shoulder, and for the first time since the knock on her door years ago, she didn't feel alone. The seasons shifted quietly after that. Fall arrived, painting the trees in gold and crimson. The diner became a place for hayrides and cider, with Atlas wearing a little pumpkin bandana that made the neighborhood kids squeal with joy. One crisp morning, Ellie opened a letter postmarked from Washington, D.C. It was from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The diner had been nominated as a National Historical Landmark, recognizing its role in honoring fallen soldiers and serving the veteran community. The final review would happen in a few months. She read the letter again and again, heart pounding. They had not only survived the storm, they had built something enduring in its wake. That evening, she gathered everyone for dinner. Jack, a few of the regulars, the man in the wheelchair who had stayed longer than expected, and even the mayor, who had once ignored her pleas for help but now wanted to be seen supporting the cause. They ate together, sharing laughter and stories. At one point, Atlas got up from his corner and wandered to the table, placing his head on Ellie's lap. She scratched his ears gently. "To Tom," she said, raising her glass, "and to the promise that brought us all here." The others echoed the toast. To the promise. Later, as the night wound down and the guests drifted home, Ellie walked out to the porch alone. Jack joined her a few minutes later. She looked at him and smiled. "You know, I used to think this place was cursed, that I was holding on to something that just brought pain." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And now I see it sacred." He nodded. "Because you didn't let the pain win." She chuckled softly. "No, but I didn't beat it alone." Atlas stepped between them and nudged Ellie's hand with his nose, as if to remind her who else had stood by her side. She laughed and bent down to kiss his head. Then she looked up at Jack and whispered, "Thank you for being here, for keeping the promise." Jack met her gaze. "Thank you for giving it meaning." The stars overhead shimmered, quiet witnesses to the lives below. The diner, glowing in warm light, stood firm against the night. And in the heart of that little town, a dog stretched out beside two people who had lost everything and still found each other. Years passed. The little diner that had once stood in the shadow of grief had now become a landmark. Not because of the food, not even because of the story that once went viral, but because of what it stood for. It was a place where sorrow had turned into strength, where promises had been kept, and where one soldier's memory had lit the way for countless others. Ellie aged gracefully, the lines on her face deepened by both tears and laughter. She moved a little slower now, but her voice was still strong, and her spirit had never burned brighter. She was no longer known as the grieving widow. She was Miss Ellie, the heart of the town, the soul of the diner, the woman who had held the line when no one else would. Jack stayed. He never once spoke about leaving, because he never needed to. The town had embraced him as one of their own. He took over much of the day-to-day work of the diner, but still refused to be called its owner. He said he was only a caretaker of the place, of the story, and of a brother's memory. Atlas grew old, as all dogs do. His muzzle turned white, his legs stiffened with time. His eyes, though still sharp, carried a heaviness that only age could bring. But even in his final years, he remained a sentinel. He still greeted every customer at the door, still curled beneath the counter every morning, still rested his head on Ellie's knee when she read aloud from Tom's journal on quiet Sunday nights. The town watched him with reverence, for he had become more than just a dog. He was a living legend. Children who once asked to pet him now brought their own kids to meet him. Veterans saluted him without irony. And when he lay in the sun on the front porch, townsfolk would stop just to sit beside him in silence. One morning, long after the autumn leaves had fallen, and the first snowflakes began to gather on the windowsills, Atlas didn't rise with the dawn. Jack found him beneath the American flag by the porch, where he always liked to sleep. He was peaceful, as if dreaming of a place beyond war and pain, a place with open fields and endless sun, where no soldier was ever left behind. Ellie sat beside him for hours, her hand resting on his still form. No one spoke. The town fell into a quiet grief, the kind reserved for those rare, sacred losses that words can't hold. They buried Atlas behind the diner, under the oak tree where he used to chase falling leaves as a pup. The whole town came. A bugler played taps. Veterans stood in salute. Children cried softly. Ellie placed Tom's old dog tags beside him, and Jack whispered something only Atlas would understand. A stone was placed above the grave, simple and strong. Atlas, a soldier's dog, loyal to the end. Time moved forward, as it always does. The diner continued to thrive, now run by a small team of veterans and their families. The walls were covered in even more photographs, more letters, more memories. Soldiers who had visited once came back again and again. Some brought spouses. Some brought children. A few brought service dogs of their own. Ellie started a foundation in Tom's name, offering scholarships to children of fallen soldiers and therapy dogs to veterans struggling with PTSD. Jack helped run the programs. They named it the Promise Project. Every year on the anniversary of Tom's sacrifice, the town held a candlelight vigil at the diner. They read his journal aloud, line by line, until the last page. Jack always finished the reading with the same words Tom had written the night before his final mission. If I fall, let them know I chose it. I chose to protect. I chose to keep a promise. And every year, the crowd responded in unison. We remember, we carry it forward. Then, one spring morning, years after the story first broke, Ellie received a letter from a young man stationed overseas. He had watched the original video when he was just a teenager, unsure if the military was his calling. The story had moved him deeply, inspired him to serve, and kept him grounded through every hardship. He wrote, I never knew Tom, but I carry him with me. Because of you, because of Jack, because of Atlas, I knew what it meant to fight for something bigger than myself. Thank you for showing the world what honor really looks like. Ellie placed a letter on the wall next to Tom's photograph. It was another reminder that the story hadn't ended. It was still being lived. Years later, on the porch of the same diner, Ellie sat in a rocking chair, watching the golden sun dip beneath the hills. Jack sat beside her. He had gray in his beard now, but his eyes were still steady, still kind. A new dog lay at their feet, still young, still learning, but calm and loyal, as if the spirit of Atlas had whispered some of his wisdom into her heart. Ellie turned to Jack and asked, "Do you ever think about that first day?" Jack smiled. "Every day." She laughed gently. "I remember thinking you were just a stranger with scars and a dog who didn't know how to sit still." Jack looked down at the young pup beside them. Some things never change. Ellie tilted her head back and looked up at the sky, the stars blinking to life one by one. "Do you think they're watching?" Jack didn't need to ask who she meant. He nodded. "I know they are." And in the silence that followed, beneath the old oak tree and the glow of the porch light, the wind carried the faint sound of a collar jingling, like a dog running through the grass, loyal as ever, forever guarding the place built from a soldier's promise. The diner stood there still, not just a building, not just a business, but a beacon, a place of healing, a living memory. And long after Ellie and Jack were gone, long after the sun had set on their final day, people still came. They came for the food. They stayed for the story. And they left carrying something more, something sacred, something eternal, a promise kept,